I think what's important is that there's an understanding of the difference between customer experience and customer centricity, because they're not actually the same thing.
Welcome to a new episode of Engati CX. I'm your host, Sridhar, and we're really glad to have all of you join us today. On this show, we talk to CX and technology experts from around the world. We explore, uncover, and share fresh insights on creating experiences that your customers will remember and look forward to. A little bit about Engati. Engati is the world's leading multilingual no-code digital CX platform. We're available across 14 different channels with 45,000 solutions created across 186 countries for all our customers. Engati has also been recognized as a top platform by Inc. magazine, Tech World, CIO magazine, amongst others. We run the Engati blog, video channel, and the Engati CX podcast, receiving upwards of 400,000 visitors annually. And now for our guest, Ian. Ian Golding is the author of the book, Customer What? The honest and practical guide to customer experience. He's also a global customer experience specialist and certified customer experience professional at Customer Experience Consultancy Limited, where he advises a wide range of businesses across various sectors in all aspects of customer experience management, with a special focus on customer experience strategy, measurement, customer journey management, improvement, and employee advocacy and techniques and solutions. So welcome to the show, Ian. Really excited to have you on board.
Thank you so much, Sridhar, and thank you for such a lovely introduction as well.
So looking forward to the conversation, Ian, but just before we dive into the interview with Ian, don't forget to subscribe to Engati and tap the bell icon to get access to exclusive content from thought leaders all across the world. So Ian, let's just dive in. I've got a fundamental question for you to start with. You're a renowned expert in customer experience. So let me ask, how do we instill that customer-centric mindset into any organization?
In principle, it should be so easy to answer. But in reality, it's more difficult than organizations imagine. There is a phrase that I coined a few years ago that customer experience doesn't happen by osmosis. And I say that because, as we know, it doesn't matter whether you're in Mumbai or Manchester, many companies talk about customer centricity, but it doesn't just automatically happen. And so what I talk about is the need to have a trigger to get people thinking and acting in the interests of the customer. And what I mean by a trigger doesn't have to be complicated, but there has to be something that reminds everyone that we don't just exist for the business to make money, but we've got to be asking ourselves, are we really doing whatever it might be, a task or a decision, with the customer in mind? So the best example that I always give people is the empty chair at the table, the Jeff Bezos approach to creating a trigger. Have an empty chair at the table that represents your customer. And every time you make a decision, look at the chair and ask yourself, what would the customer think about that decision? The point is, this doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to cost any money. It's just about having that mindset to get people thinking. But getting people to think when we're obsessed with performing tasks is easier said than done.
If we get people to start thinking that way and we start getting results, how is business success then eventually linked to the success of your customers, if you get that right?
Yeah. So just changing the mindset is a core element of this. And I think what's important is that there's an understanding of the difference between customer experience and customer centricity, because they're not actually the same thing. Organizations have always had a customer experience, but whether they've known that or not is a different matter. And the experience represents everything that the organization does that enables their customers to interact with their products and services. Now, just recognizing there as an experience is important, but that doesn't mean the experience is any good. And in fact, even if you start to improve that experience, there is a limitation as to the benefit that will deliver unless the experience is being delivered in a customer-centric environment. So, and that connects to the first question, the customer-centric environment, essentially meaning that everyone, when they do anything, is thinking and acting in the interests of the customer. So that's the fundamental thing, is to understand the difference. Now, where the measurable benefit comes in is the critical importance of understanding how to robustly measure the ability of the experience to meet the needs and expectations of customers. And measurement is, in my opinion, the most important competency of all in the field of customer experience. Regrettably, many organizations are not doing it very well. And one of the reasons for that is that measurement for customer experience is actually quite scientific. And it should be about the capturing, listening to, and acting on three voices of measurement. Voice of the customer, everyone is aware of, is one of those voices. Typically, that's the only one that organizations are capturing. But there are two other voices, VOE, which is voice of the employee, and VOP, which is voice of the process. Voice of the process is regrettably the least commonly measured of all. But what measuring process enables you to do is understand the relationship between what you do and the way the customer feels about it. And it is that measurable relationship that will enable you to impact the fourth voice being voice of the business. Because what obviously we need to understand is the relationship between how we measure the experience and the impact it has on business metrics, revenue, profit, growth, and so on and so forth. So in summary, measurement is so important. But what I've described is unfortunately not particularly well understood. And that's why we're not seeing as much transformation as we need to see.
Ian, you touched a little bit towards the last end of your answer in terms of metrics, be it revenue, profit, cost. Is that all pervasive then, touching all aspects? So revenue has obviously growth implications, cost has, or profit rather, has cost implications. So is it touching on every single metric?
100%. In very simplistic terms, what I will always say is that customer experience is about two things in its simplest form. It is about taking cost out at the same time as putting the experience in. And those two things are not mutually exclusive. You know, as we know, unfortunately, organizations obsess with either one or the other. So, you know, right now, as a result of the pandemic, this world of austerity that we've lived in for years has become more extreme. So businesses are having to try and find ways of saving money and cutting cost. But unfortunately, if you cut cost without any understanding of the experience, you'll make the experience worse. Likewise, you could throw all the bells and whistles that you want at the experience, but if you do that without an understanding of cost, you'll create something that's not financially viable. So it's really important to understand the two. And that's why I will always share with any customer experience professional that there are three forms of return on investment, sort of categories that need to be understood. The first one is revenue generation. But revenue generation is the long-term financial return. You know, that doesn't come in 6 months. That doesn't come by clicking your fingers. And unfortunately, as we know, that's what many leaders who don't quite understand this expect. Why have we not seen any effect on revenue? Well, it doesn't happen like that. This is about over time having an effect on the ongoing relationship with your customers. The short to medium term financial return is cost reduction and cost avoidance. You know, that this is really important. By eliminating the things going wrong in the customer journey, organizations can save millions. But I think there's a lack of understanding of that, you know, customer experience can't be about cost cutting. Well, it's not about cost cutting. It's about eliminating things that go wrong. And by doing that, you don't just improve customer perception, you save money as well and become a leaner, more efficient organization.
Ian, you've done a lot of work on customer management and journey mapping. Tell us a little bit about the latest models and you know, what insights have you garnered?
Are you ready for me to start preaching? If it hasn't sounded preachy enough already, I'm about to get even preachier. You know, customer journey mapping it's become a phenomenon, for want of a better description. It doesn't matter where you go in the world. I'm very fortunate to have worked on every continent on Earth apart from Antarctica. And it doesn't matter where you go, people are obsessed with journey mapping. And there is no doubt understanding the interactions that your customers are having with your organization is very important. However, the obsession with journey mapping has led to many wasting, I say wasting, that's a bit harsh, investing huge amounts of time and money in creating beautiful looking pictures, but more often than not, they don't know what to do with them. And I was told by my parents when I was very young, if you do something and you don't know why, then don't bother doing it in the first place. So what I've been preaching about for 3 years now is the need to not obsess with journey mapping, but to obsess with journey management. And there is a fundamental difference, because journey mapping is one step in a continuous, never-ending cycle of activity that will enable an organization to manage the journey and manage it to become ever better capable of meeting the needs and expectations of customers. And that cycle demonstrates how customer experience as a profession is all about interconnected activities. It's not about sort of activities in isolation of each other. And this customer journey management cycle includes knowing who the customer is in the first place, so you can visualize their journey, so you can measure that journey to identify the small number of priorities having the greatest detrimental effect on customer perception and, as a result, financial performance. And when you know what the priorities are, you then fix them. And then you go back around that cycle again. Now, if you think about those activities, many organizations are mapping journeys by channel or by product. But as I tell everyone, the customer journey is called a customer journey for a reason. It's a customer journey, not a channel journey or a product journey. And if customers can interact across channels and across products, if you map the journeys in isolation of each other, you will misunderstand how they interact across those channels. It's amazing how many organizations have mapped their journeys once and never looked at them ever again. It's incredible how many organizations have been measuring the experience for years, but they don't know what the journey looks like. And if I prod and poke companies hard enough, they'll give me a good idea of what their priorities are, but they never fix them. And this is such a massive issue. And it's why I preach and get very overexcited about it, because until there is an understanding of this cycle and that discipline, we will see limited impact on the experiences that we have as customers.
I can clearly see the passion coming out. And it's interesting, the concept of journey mapping versus journey management, like you call it. And Ian, if I can touch on maybe something you said earlier, voice of the customer versus voice of the employee.
Yes.
Can we apply some of these techniques of customer journey mapping or customer journey management equally to employees within the company?
100%. Again, interestingly, it's been around the last 3 years or so that there's been a growing recognition of the connection between the employee experience and the customer experience. The most customer-centric organizations in the world have always known that the way you treat your people is the way your people will treat your customers. But it's really only the last 3 years that we've seen a much more active understanding of that. And in fact, the pandemic has only accelerated it. So what I would say now is that we've actually moved on from customer experience, and we're now in a world of the human experience, because the human experience combines both EX and CX. And so it's really important, I believe, that if an organization is sincere in wanting to become customer centric, you can't do that without your people. And so it comes back to understanding that difference between customer experience and customer centricity. Yes, you can map your journey to your heart's content, but if you don't understand the experience that your people are going through, you will see a limited impact. So it's really, really important to understand that relationship between the two.
In your experience then, as organizations try to grapple and solve for the customer journey, what are the typical roadblocks they encounter, and how do we kind of suss them out, evaluate them, and rectify them eventually?
There is still a fundamental confusion between process and journey. Now, I think it's changing. It's becoming slightly clearer to many organizations around the world. But part of the problem is that, and again, it does depend on the size and complexity of an organization, but people are so deep down in the detail of process that they can't actually see what the customer sees. And part of the problem is that most legacy organizations, they weren't created to differentiate on the experience, they were created to differentiate on products and services. So what that means is that their people are very focused on performing tasks, doing stuff, as I call it. And they're down in the weeds of that detail of process. Processes represent the things we do every day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the customer will see what we do every day. There are many employees who are doing things every day that will never have an impact on the customer at all. And we have to ask ourselves, why are they doing that then? And so for many employees, getting out of that detail is a real challenge, partly because we've become very comfortable with complexity. And there is a very intentional technique that I teach, which I call the level 0 customer journey, which is a visualization of the journey at its highest possible level. People find it very uncomfortable because it's like, this is too simple. It's like, why is it too simple? But it's because we're so used to the granular detail. And so I think that the challenge is changing that mindset is tough, because as I say, businesses, they like that. They like having 500 KPIs that are being measured on a regular basis, the control of what your people are doing. But the problem is, the fundamental problem is that legacy means that we have lots of people in brilliant organizations who don't think. And this is not because they're bad people, but they're doing what they've been told, and actually they find it very difficult to work around that, because they're either fearful of not doing what they're told, or they don't know that they can challenge. Why are we doing this? So my biggest response to your question is that if we want this to change, we have got to give our people time to think.
Right.
Now it sounds so simple, but it really isn't. And anyone listening to this, if you ask yourself, in the last week, did your people have any time to think? All right, you might be surprised at the answer, because we are too focused on task. We don't give our people time to think. And I have to acknowledge, hold my hands up, I'm as guilty as anyone else. There are times when I don't give myself time to think. But if we don't, we just do what we think we should do, whether it's right or wrong. And that is something that I would love to see changing.
As you were answering, I was kind of reflecting and thinking, have I had the time to think this week? And the answer is probably not.
No. And it's not because we're bad people. It's just we're so focused on that stuff that we don't stop. And this is personal lives as well as business lives. We do need to stop and reflect. And in fact, when I think about the last 15 months of this horrendous situation the world is going through, one of the positives is that we have had that opportunity to stop and reflect, because we didn't have a choice. As business world shut down temporarily, it did stop. Prior to this, I would probably have been not at home. I would have been in a country around the world. But just having that little bit of extra time to think has brought a little bit of humanity back in to the way businesses operate.
There's always a silver lining in everything. So on the point of thinking, Ian, and the level 0 journey, as you call it, is it also a behavioral problem as such, in terms of mapping out an optimal journey and managing the customer's experience?
To me, the answer that I would say is education, education, education. It's not so much behavioral, it's more a lack of knowledge.
Right.
What I will say to people is that the most customer-centric organizations in the world never stop learning. And it's that ability to say we don't know everything that will differentiate the very best from the mediocre. In my opinion, whilst I'm not an advocate of Microsoft Teams. I am an advocate of Microsoft. And in my opinion, one of the most transformational leaders right now in the world is the CEO of Microsoft, who is a brilliant Indian man called Satya Nadella. Many people don't even know he's the CEO of Microsoft, but that's part of the point, because it's not about him, it's about the organization. And he's been working ever since he's become CEO to turn Microsoft from a company that knows everything into a company that learns everything. And it sounds so subtle, but it's not. It's very, very important that we don't think we know it all. And I think that is a big issue in businesses today. And so that is a little bit behavioral in a way. But I deliver customer experience masterclasses all around the world. I find it fascinating that every now and then I get a senior leader from Amazon attending one of my masterclasses. And I find it fascinating because people say to me, why do they attend your masterclass? They don't need that. But that's the point, is because they want to know, what do we not know? There's got to be something that we don't know. And that is the difference. And so I think what leaders of organizations need to ask themselves is, do we really understand the science that customer experience has become? Because if we don't, we will just carry on doing the same old things, but will we fundamentally change is a different matter.
On a timely basis, just last month, I was reading Hit Refresh by Satya, which was really insightful as well.
He's a brilliant man. I'd love to meet him one day. So I always say I have two man crushes at the moment. One is Jeff Bezos, the other is Satya. So one day maybe I'll meet both of them.
Right. Right. So let's leave you with one last question here, which is any sound bites that you would like to leave your audience with? Anything that we haven't touched on? Any profound insights that you'd like to share?
So I will always say this to anyone that has an interest in the field of customer experience or who is working in the field, so is acting as a customer experience professional. Doing what we do is hard. I've been involved in this field for 25 years, but I spent 17 years doing this on the inside. And the fundamental thing we've got to understand is that many organizations, whilst they might think they want us to be doing this, they don't really. Change is something that human beings find incredibly difficult. And what we're trying to do is to get people to think differently, behave differently, measure what they do differently. And that means we'll very often be pushing water uphill. And, the other issue is that we're not always the most popular people in an organization. People don't want us to be doing this. But the reason I say that is that I teach a professional qualification in customer experience, of which there are 6 competencies. But if there were a 7th competency, the 7th competency I would call courage. Because to do what we do, we have to have the absolutely sincere belief that we are doing the right thing for the right reason. We've got to have the courage, persistence, sheer bloody mindedness to keep going, irrespective of the resistance that we might face, knowing that everything we're doing is for the good of the organization, the shareholders, the employees, and the customer. To be the best customer experience professional in the world, it cannot be about you. It's got to be about the organization. But that's tough. It's tough when rocks are being thrown at you every 5 seconds. But if you can get your head down and you're driven by doing the right thing, that the rewards are just remarkable. Seeing the whites of people's eyes, seeing them suddenly get it, that there is no feeling like it. So if at any point you are doubting yourself, it's perfectly normal. Just ask yourself, are you doing the right thing for the right reason? And if you're still worried, reach out to the customer experience community. Reach out to Engati. Reach out to other customer experience professionals because the wonderful thing about this community is that it is incredibly caring and incredibly sharing. And you're not alone. There are others going through the same. So reach out and talk.
Right. So with that, thank you so much, Ian, for giving us your time. Your insights are really valuable, and I'm sure the audience is going to really love all the insights that you've shared with us today. Thank you ever so much.
Such a pleasure. Thanks for asking me.
And with that, we'll call it a wrap. We'll be back with a new episode with a brand new expert soon. So stay tuned and we'll see you around for the next one.